Welcome to my channel, Simply Speak English, and thank you for watching our videos. Andy Gerald had dinner every evening at the boarding house on 2nd Avenue, where he rented a furnished room. One evening during dinner, he met a new guest, a young woman named Miss Pamela. Miss Pamela was petite and quiet. She wore a simple brown dress and didn't seem interested in much, not even her dinner, which she barely touched. She glanced at Mr. Gerald, said his name, and then went back to eating. Mr. Gerald, known for his friendly smile that everyone liked, smiled at her in return, but didn't think much more about her after that. 2 weeks later, Andy was sitting outside the house, enjoying the cool evening air. He heard movement behind him and turned his head. What he saw made it impossible for him to look away. Miss Pamela was stepping out of the house. She wore a black dress made of soft, flowing fabric. Her hat was black, and as she slipped on black gloves, he noticed that her entire outfit was devoid of any other color. All black, Andy immediately assumed someone in her family must have passed away. Her golden hair was thick and soft, resting at the back of her neck. While her face wasn't traditionally beautiful, her large gray eyes gave it an almost enchanting quality. She gazed upward with an expression of deep sorrow. Picture her, all dressed in black, with golden hair shining against the dark clothing. Her eyes filled with sadness as she stared into the distance. At that moment, Andy made up his mind to pay more attention to Miss Pamela. He stood up and spoke to her. "It's a lovely, clear evening, Miss Pamela," he said, "for those who have the heart to enjoy it." "Yes, Mr. Gerald," she replied with a slow, deep sigh. "I hope," Andy hesitated, "I hope no one in your family has passed away." "Death has taken someone," said Miss Pamela. "Not from my family, but someone who—" "I shouldn't burden you with my troubles, Mr. Gerald." "Why not, Miss Pamela?" "Maybe I could understand," he replied. Miss Pamela gave a small smile, but it only made her look sadder than when she wasn't smiling. "Laugh, and the world laughs with you," she said. "But when you're sad, the world doesn't care. I've learned that, Mr. Gerald. I have no friends in this city, but you've been kind to me, and I appreciate it." Andy felt confused. He didn't think he had done much, apart from passing her the salt at dinner. "It's not easy to be alone in New York," he said, "but when New York is friendly, it can be very friendly. How about we take a little walk in the park? It might do you good." "Thank you, Mr. Gerald. I think I'd enjoy that, but I don't want my sadness to affect you." They entered the park through the open gates and found a quiet bench to sit on. "We were going to get married soon," Miss Pamela began. "He was a real count. He owned land and a grand house in Italy. His name was Count Fernando Mazzini. My father didn't approve of him at first. One time, we even tried to run away to get married, but my father followed us and brought me back. I was so afraid they might fight. But eventually, my father gave his consent. Fernando returned to Italy to prepare everything for our life together. My father was very proud, especially because Fernando wanted to give me thousands of dollars for new clothes. But my father insisted it wasn't necessary. After Fernando left, I moved to the city and started working in a shop. 3 days ago, I received a letter from Italy. It said that Fernando had been killed. "That's why I'm wearing black," said Miss Pamela. "My heart died with Fernando. Mr. Gerald, I can't take an interest in anyone else. I shouldn't keep you from spending time with friends who can smile and enjoy life with you. Shall we walk back to the house?" Now, readers, if a woman tells a man her heart has died, it's natural for him to want to bring it back to life. "I'm very sorry," said Mr. Gerald. "No, let's not go back to the house just yet. And please don't say you have no friends in this city, Miss Pamela. I'm your friend, and I hope you believe that." "I have his picture with me," Miss Pamela said softly. "I wear it on a chain around my neck. I've never shown it to anyone, but I'll show it to you, Mr. Gerald. I believe you're a true friend." Miss Pamela took out the small picture and showed it to him. Mr. Gerald looked at it for a long time, his interest growing. The face of Count Mazzini was striking. It was a face full of wisdom, energy, and strength, the kind of man who could lead others and inspire confidence. "I have a larger picture of him in my room," Miss Pamela said. "When we get back, I'll show it to you. That's all I have left to remember Fernando by, but he'll always live in my heart. I know that for certain." Mr. Gerald made up his mind. He wanted to take the Count's place in Miss Pamela's heart. He felt confident that he could. He would be kind, patient, and keep his cheerful smile. When they returned to the house, Miss Pamela went up to her room and brought down the larger picture of the Count. Mr. Gerald studied it carefully, but his thoughts were impossible to read. "He gave me this on the night he left for Italy," Miss Pamela said softly. "A fine-looking man," Mr. Gerald said warmly. Then he smiled. "Miss Pamela, would you like to go to Coney Island with me next Sunday afternoon?" A month later, they announced to the other guests at the boarding house that they were getting married. Even then, Miss Pamela continued to wear black. A week later, Andy Gerald and Miss Pamela sat together on the same bench in the park. Andy had been unusually quiet all day, and his face looked sad. That evening, his silence was so unusual that Maggie, Miss Pamela, had to ask him about it. "What's wrong tonight, Andy?" she asked. "Nothing, Maggie," he replied. "You've never been like this before. Something's bothering you." "What is it?" "It's nothing much, Maggie." "Yes, it is. And I want to know what it is. Is it another girl? If there's someone else you want, why don't you go to her? Go on, take your arm away." Andy realized she wasn't going to let it go. "I'll tell you then," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "But I don't think you'll understand. Have you ever heard of Mike Sullivan? People call him Big Mike Sullivan." "I've never heard of him," Maggie said. "Who is he?" "Big Mike Sullivan is the most important man in New York," Andy explained. "He's as big as a mountain, strong and powerful. If you ever say anything bad about Big Mike, there'll be 1,000,000 men ready to defend him. He's a good man, Maggie, and what's more, he's my friend. Now, I'm just a little guy, but Mike treats a little guy just as well as he does a big one. Today, I happened to run into him, and guess what he did? He came right up to me and shook my hand. I told him I'm getting married in 2 weeks. And do you know what he said? He said, 'Andy, I'll come to your wedding.' That's what he said. And Mike Sullivan always does what he says." Andy paused and looked at Maggie. "You don't understand, Maggie. But having Big Mike Sullivan at our wedding would mean the world to me. It would make me so proud." "Then why don't you invite him?" Maggie asked. "There's a reason I can't," Andy said with a heavy sigh. "Don't ask me what it is, because I can't tell you." Maggie softened her tone and looked at him. "But can't you at least smile at me?" Andy stayed silent for a moment, then asked quietly, "Maggie, do you love me as much as you loved Count Mazzini?" He waited a long time for her answer, but Maggie said nothing. Suddenly, Maggie leaned her head against Andy's shoulder and started to cry. She held onto his arm tightly, and her tears soaked into her black dress. "Maggie, Maggie," Andy said gently, forgetting all about his own troubles. "Tell me what's wrong." "Andy," Maggie said through her tears, "what I told you wasn't true. There was never any Count. There was never a man in love with me. All the other girls had someone who loved them, and I didn't. And Andy, I look good in black. You know I do. So I went to a shop and bought that picture. I made up the whole story about the Count. I even said he died just so I could wear black. And now no one could ever love me, because I didn't tell the truth. But I've never cared about anyone but you. That's the truth, Andy. That's all there is." Andy didn't move away from her. Instead, he put his arm around her and pulled her closer. She looked up and saw that he was smiling. Do you still love me, Andy?" she asked hesitantly. "Of course," Andy said warmly. "You've just made everything perfect, Maggie. I was hoping you'd tell me the truth before the wedding day." "Good girl." After a moment, Maggie spoke again. After a moment, Maggie spoke again. "Andy, did you really believe that whole story about the Count?" "Not really," Andy admitted, a twinkle in his eye. "Because the picture you're wearing on that chain around your neck, that's a picture of Big Mike Sullivan." If you like this story, then subscribe my channel for more interesting story. Thanks for watching our full video.